Russian President Vladimir Putin is facing a significant challenge in fueling his special military operation in Ukraine, as he is running short on a vital resource that has been vital to Russia for decades. The oligarchs, the true power brokers of Russian society, are moving away from Putin as his war has continuously hit them in the only place that matters to them, their pockets. This video explains what is happening between Putin and his oligarchs and why losing their support could sound the death knell for Putin's reign. In late August 2024, Times Radio interviewed journalist Diane Francis about Putin's position in the wake of Ukraine's invasion of the Russian oblast of Kursk. The invasion has made headlines in the Ukraine war over the last month, with Ukraine using it to put a ton of pressure on Putin while shifting the momentum in its own favor. The pressure is starting to mount, according to Francis. The cracks appearing inside Russia are now deepening at an alarming rate, as seen in 2023 when Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin launched a brief mutiny against Putin while calling for an end to the Ukraine war. Then came Kursk, where the Russian ruble cratered against the US dollar, reaching 96.60 rubles to $1, causing the ruble to lose 6.2% of its value. This situation made some powerful people in Russia unhappy, and the invasion undermined the image of a strongman that Putin has spent most of his reign attempting to cultivate. Ukraine's invasion of Crimea and Moscow with drone attacks has psychologically turned the tables inside Russia and internationally, as the ruble is cratering and there are some very prominent Russians speaking out against this war. These prominent Russians include Georgy Zakharevsky, founder of Paladin PMC, who has called for Putin to be removed from power following the Kursk invasion. Zakharevsky claims that Russia is already in big trouble, with the Kremlin attacked, the Black Sea Fleet rendered almost useless, and Russia's population dying out and impoverished. Putin now faces a problem with his oligarchs, as these extremely rich and powerful Russian citizens are likely unconcerned with what is happening to the average Russian. They have spent the last 2.5 years trying to depose Putin, but the loss of their support could sound the death knell for Putin's reign. The Russian government is facing a crisis due to the ongoing conflict with Ukraine, which has been exacerbated by sanctions and the collapse of the ruble. One of the key figures in this conflict is Deripaska, who has expressed his concerns about Putin's actions and the Kremlin's spending on the war. He has called the Ukrainian conflict mad, and called for an immediate ceasefire, which is far from Putin's claims that a ceasefire could only be called if it took into account the territory Russia has captured in Ukraine thus far. Abbas Galyamov's analysis of Deripaska's comments is particularly concerning for Putin, as he is known for his intolerant nature towards dissent. If Putin engaged in a purge during the war with Ukraine, it would make his position even more perilous, as he would be surrounded by ruthless people who would get rid of him just as he did with those who were wrongly stepping. This situation makes Putin feel less secure, as prominent names are now speaking out against him, including at least one person who runs a private militia. Ukraine has also claimed that it could have assassinated Putin at a recent Russian naval parade if it had gotten permission from the US to use the weapons it had provided to do the job. Russia tried to play this off as a victory for Putin, but psychologically, this news had to be damaging to Putin. The head wolf of the pack is now being surrounded by many younger, hungrier wolves, and militia leaders, oligarchs, and Ukraine itself are all calling for his head. The base on which Putin has stood for so long is crumbling underneath him, and he is starting to feel nervous. He has started transferring air defenses previously stationed on the front lines to the Kremlin in an effort to protect himself from Ukrainian aerial attacks. He has also been humiliated by the Kursk invasion, with the forced evacuation of almost 200,000 people from Russian territory being a black eye on his strongman image. As Francis points out, Putin can control the state media around this incursion, but he cannot stop the people in Belgorod and Kursk who are being evacuated. In other words, Putin's stranglehold over his people is slipping. Putin's war to stay in power is facing challenges such as Ukraine attacking on Russian territory, militia leaders calling for his head, and oligarchs dissatisfied with his reign. As a result, Putin is running out of the vital resource that his war machine needs, oil. A YouTube video by Hamish de Breton Gordon, a former British Army officer and chemical weapons expert, highlighted Russia's precarious oil position. De Breton Gordon points out that Russian oil refineries have long been targets of Ukrainian strikes, with the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, being involved in drone attacks in June 2024. These operations disrupt Russia's energy infrastructure, damaging refinery equipment, causing injuries or deaths, and causing fuel to go up in smoke. The result is that Putin is being forced to ration petroleum inside Russia, which is essential for the Russian people's lifeline. The Russian oil and gas sector accounts for an annual average of about 20% of the country's GDP. This has remained the case during the Ukraine war, even with sanctions being levied against Russia, leading to Putin having to sell oil at a lower price. More worrying for Putin is that Russian oil also accounts for between 30% and 50% of Russia's federal budget over the last 10 years, meaning shortages have the potential to cut the Russian spending power in half. The Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries aim to place pressure on Putin by cutting off Russia's access to what is arguably its most valuable resource, which is oil. The result, as Debreton Gordon points out, is widespread fuel rationing throughout Russia. In conclusion, Putin's war to stay in power is facing numerous challenges, including the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the impact of drone attacks on oil refineries, and the potential for widespread fuel rationing throughout Russia. The Odessa Journal reported in March 2024 that Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil facilities have resulted in the dismantling of around 10% of Russia's oil production capacity in a matter of weeks. This puts Putin in an even more precarious position, as Ukraine has likely taken out even more of Russia's oil production capacity in the months since the Odessa report. The majority of Russia's oil refineries are located in the European part of Russia, within reach of Ukrainian drones. This is a consequence of Russia's reliance on oil exports to sustain its economy, with the positioning being chosen to reduce transportation distances. Now, Russia is in a position where it is seeing these processing facilities getting attacked. Worse, those facilities are exporting less and less of their oil into Europe, instead being pushed to send it further east via the Trans-Siberian Railway. So, not only is Russia not selling as much oil, and losing millions of gallons of it, but it is being forced to absorb higher transportation costs at a time when it is already under sanctions. The Russian approach to just-in-time delivery to its own oil needs results in fuel being transported into Russia on a needs-must basis. With Putin's war having lasted for over 2 years and production being affected by Ukrainian attacks, everyday Russians are in danger of no longer being able to get the fuel they need because soldiers on the front lines have to be prioritized. This has led to some surprising actions from Russia, such as Russia looking to secure gasoline from Kazakhstan in case of a shortage at home. However, Kazakhstan's energy minister, Shingiz Ilyasov, claimed the country had received no such request. Politico published an article highlighting the effects of Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refineries, including skyrocketing prices and fuel shortages. The cost of diesel rose by 10% in a single week according to official government figures, with petroleum costs having seen a slow rise to the point where they were 20% higher at the end of April 2024 than they were at the start of the year. Over 100,000 tons of exports per week lost over the course of a year has a clear impact on Russia's ability to fund Putin's special military operation. In July 2024, the country's deputy prime minister, Alexander Novak, noted that Russia may have to institute a gasoline export ban in August 2024 to make up for supply shortages in the domestic market. Putin is struggling to maintain control over Russia's oil industry, which has been a significant issue since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Kurdish invasion has shown that Putin is not the strongman he claimed to be, and the issues Russia is facing with oil due to Ukraine's attacks are chipping away at a power base that was already starting to look shaky. The original Russian oligarchs appeared in the 1990s, fresh off the back of the fall of the Soviet Union. Under the Soviet yoke, almost every institution in Russia was state-owned, including its corporations, financial sector, and energy industry. With the power structures of all three breaking down, the people who would become Russia's first oligarchs swept in, purchasing assets in oil, gas, and finance to position themselves as Russia's true power brokers. When Putin came to power, he turned his focus on the oligarchs. Those who didn't support him were eradicated, with some even being sent to jail. In their place came a fresh batch of oligarchs over whom Putin could maintain some level of control because their wealth was granted via money from the Russian state. That entire system has been disrupted by the Ukraine war. Sanctions haven't helped. They send the message to oligarchs that their money, which is the only thing they really care about, isn't safe if they stay obedient to Putin. The West is sending the message that Putin can't protect his oligarchs, though the message serves to put the oligarch between a rock and a hard place. The West is limiting their access to money to make them disloyal to Putin. However, the system Putin has created means the oligarchs have to stay loyal if they're to keep receiving cash from the Russian leader. With Russia's energy infrastructure being attacked and its oil being burned in refineries, Putin's promises of wealth are starting to ring hollow to some. Shortages, whether they be domestic or issues that lead to export bans, are a sign of an industry in crisis. An industry that accounts for around 20% of Russia's GDP and up to 50% of its federal reserves, this industry goes a long way toward funding the deals Putin has been making with oligarchs over the last 2 decades. Some are still making money hand over fist. The problem is going to come if Russia's issues with oil continue. The more refineries are struck, the less oil there will be to go around, leading to increases in prices in the short term. This creates a mini-boom for the oligarchs who have interests in oil, but dwindling supplies will eventually lead to lower sales. This situation can only affect the profits of companies like Lukoil, which in turn affects the dividends that can be paid out to the oligarchs that Putin wants to keep on his side. The collapse of that agreement to enrich one another will lead to the oligarchs turning their back on Putin as he oversees a Russia on the verge of crumbling.